The third question that was most voted up this week was about unconscious and emergent goals, or even changing goals within an organization. And this person talked about how an organization shares goals and objectives, but they said, what about those goals and objectives that arise through regular interaction within an organization? And what about unconscious goals? So here, I guess the question becomes, what happens to a firm that lacks a clear goal and purpose? And some of us think of organizations like maybe Yahoo has been criticized as lacking always a clear goal about what that company's about. And I can see cases where that might be problematic in some ways because it leads to difficulties about coordination and behavior around what. But on the other, there's sometimes certain contexts, like contexts of uncertainty, where the lack of, or at least differentiated goals might be beneficial because you can explore and change more readily in an environment. So it's not always clear that the lack of a clear goal is a problem, but usually it kind of helps with coordination and the degree to which something is a defined organization. Now again, some organizations also change goals, so there is some kind of complexity here with goals. So like, for example, the March of Dimes is known for changing its goal. At the early part of the last century, they solved polio, or at least most of it, and had to find a different mission or a different kind of goal to focus on and coordinate around, and so it became childbirth defects. So we do have changing goals, and that seems possible, but perhaps, again, not something that's recommended to be done very frequently because it has coordination costs. What about unconscious goals and identities? And here the thing that I constantly wonder about is not only the moral claims of organizations and their mission statements, like you saw in this week's lectures, that are implicit. I mean, they're implicit in those statements, but also selection of individuals into firms and organizations. So it's common that, for example, teachers in schools, that a lot of them are particularly interested in a social justice or interested in kind of community service, whereas in other organizations you may see a different kind of selection, right? And people like Pierre Bourdieu in France have written about how academics in different departments selected, and he found things like, physicians and medical doctors within the university system there in the time in France in the 60s had come from upper class backgrounds and were conservative in their political orientations, whereas in the social scientists were kind of rebels from blue-collar backgrounds or alternative backgrounds and were kind of a different sort. So I think there is something to this about selection, that the individuals that compose an organization may have certain kinds of latent identities and ideals. But I think you want to, and I think it's also an issue there is about the conflict between the organizational goal and those individuals' kind of motives or identities themselves. And there's often an effort within organizational culture theory to align those two, or to enable individuals to express their own identities through that of the organizations. So I think it's an interesting question. A lot of firms have ambiguous goals. A lot of firms do have emergent goals through the interactions of the participants and through their kind of informal organization. They also have changing goals, and in addition, there's sometimes conflict between the organization's goals and the individuals. And again, that's another reason why we need analysts, so that we understand these dynamics and when they become problematic and when they can become kind of an asset and a resource to the firm.